Hey everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Welcome back. Today I've got a tutorial for you, one that has been requested quite a few times, how to draw floating islands. Floating islands have become a bit of a staple of some fantasy worlds, and they're a really cool feature that can be really great to add to your fantasy art or your fantasy maps. So let's get down to it. I've got my sketch pad and my pen. Let's take a look at how I draw floating islands. Before we get down to the paper, actually, I just wanted to show you all the Aeronoth map, which you often see in the background over there, and just remind you that I did do some floating islands over here, although I do feel like I've improved a bit since I even did these. These are, of course, a big part of the world of Aeronoth, because they are the part of the world where the convocation comes from, Viator. So this is some art by John Pintar, which is really great. So I do recommend just going and searching for images of floating islands. There's so much beautiful inspirational art out there. I also recently saw a video from Questing Beast where he did a live stream mapping thing and he drew a whole map that was all floating islands. So I'll put a link to that down in the description below as well, and you can check that out. I'll also give you this word of caution. If you're drawing these on a fantasy map and you have a pretty top-down map, I don't know if my tutorial is going to help you very much, because these floating islands will really mess with your perspective. Even on mine a little bit, you can see that most of the map is sort of top-down-ish. You know, the mountains, yeah, it's a little more of a isometric look. And so it doesn't look too bad with the islands like this. But if you're doing more of that top-down style, drawing them in this manner can really mess with your perspective. Anyway, let's get down to the paper and I'll show you how I draw an island. Now there's a couple ways. One really interesting way, one to think about floating islands is actually, I'm going to turn my paper upside down here. And one way to do this is to think about a floating island as an upside down mountain. Alright, so the bottoms are usually fairly rocky. So let's just try this here. Let's try drawing a really jagged kind of mountain with a little bit of a rounded feel to it. That's maybe a little too jagged there, but we can just go like that. There we go. All right, and then if you were to draw, if I were to, you know, make this a mountain on a map, a very nice jagged mountain, I would probably, you know, make some lines going down here, over here. And I would probably make some little lines going down from the peaks too to kind of delineate where the shade would fall. Like that. Like that. And you can kind of go a little crazy in here and we're getting a little, maybe not crazy, maybe craggy is a better word for it. All right, and then you could throw in some shading too. We'll do a little bit of shading on the left side, so I would probably do some shading right there. Taking my size 1 pen here, just doing some quick hatching on the left side. Maybe some darker spots here and there, just to get some gradients. And you can kind of make some little dark panels here and there, and just add more variation. Something like that, and there we've got, you know, a pretty craggy looking mountain. And now you could make this the top of your floating island. That's one option, but let's just turn it around. There we go. We've got the bottom of a floating island, guys. And so now going back to my thicker pen here, we'll just kind of curve this up a little bit. And now, so one way to think about your floating island is like an upside down cone, like this. So in this case, you know, I could kind of sketch in my pencil marks there. for the shape I'm going to have it at. And a lot of it depends on the angle. If your map is a little more top down, you would make that circle a little more circular, a little less less of a narrow oval. But for me, I'll make it pretty narrow. We're looking at this almost kind of straight on-ish. And I'm going to just add a little bit of droop here, as if there's like some grass and vegetation drooping over the edge of my floating island. And you can choose if you want to make it very rocky, you can do away with that. Mine will be a little more lush in vegetation. And now what do you want on top of it? In my case, I'll just kind of sketch in, we'll do some trees here. And we'll do kind of a mountain, small mountain range. There we go. And maybe we'll even do a city. So yeah, we'll have forest, mountain, city. So here's my spiry forest here. And it'll extend a little in front of these mountains too. And then we'll have some mountains. Now we're gonna have a city. Just gonna draw in lots of little blocks here. Some towers. And we'll darken them in here. A bustling metropolis on this island. Do a little shading here on the side of the mountains as well. And we can even do a little bit on the trees. In this case, it looks like the light would be coming from that way, based on the way I shaded the bottom here. And so you can add a little more shading, create some variation there. But really, doesn't need much shading. Make some more lines kind of going down there. Maybe joining up there. So my floating island right here is fairly traditional. Now we're going to get into some other kinds that you can consider drawing. One way to really vary it is to, I think, make it sharper. Make it coming to more of a point. I think that looks really cool. So let's try one of those here. And we'll also vary the top a little bit. So instead of doing lots of vegetation, let's just make it very barren and rocky. And in this case, I actually sometimes like to start with the top. And so if we're going to we'll just make a jagged top, but it is going to be flat on top for whatever reason. Okay, so something like that. And then we would just draw lines coming down from these. You can make them of varying thickness, some of them thicker than others. And then we want to make it pretty jagged here, pretty pointed anyway. All right, so something like that can look pretty cool. And then again, you can just go in and kind of lay in these lines a little more, and some from the bottom too. And I think it looks best if you don't really connect them. Just kind of make these jagged lines here. Something like that. And you can have more thin lines in between those just to give it more texture. You can even just do some kind of dots and maybe little squiggles on the edge, and just really vary the texture and try to fill it in more. So that is another possible look for your floating islands. One more I'll mention is kind of a cool idea, and that is instead of having a flat top, what if you had a floating island that was just basically a big floating rock? One way to look at it would be sort of a double cone instead of
this would make it a lot harder for things to live on and
two cones on top of one another. And so what if you just did, you know, not a flat top, in other words? So something like that instead can look kind of cool as well.
Anyway, I'm not super confident with this style, but I was actually inspired by this from the game Mass Effect Andromeda. In one of the opening scenes, the first planet you land on, there's these really cool floating islands that are basically, they're just big floating rocks, these big monolithic rocks. And they're kind of bobbing up and down with the storms on the planet, if I remember correctly. And it's just really cool. So again, these floating islands can give this fantastical element to our fictional worlds, and just remind people who are reading or playing in these worlds that this is not our planet. This is a different place.
It's worth thinking about too. You know, do you want these to be wild, natural places of just beauty, or do you want them to be, you know, filled with cities? There's all kinds of different directions you could take your floating island culture. Another thing I'll throw out there is in the Questing Beast video I mentioned in the beginning. He does do these kind of things in between them. I think in his video, I believe he did vines that were kind of attaching them. So I could be wrong on that, but you can go check that out. That's one idea, is to do vines that are kind of connecting these, and you know, you can make kind of drooping here like these. Again, that's kind of that wild, natural look. But I have also seen in some cases where people do, you know, actually man-made bridges where, you know, it would be more of a neat, tidy structure, or chains that are connecting them. Chains would be, you know, a little harder for me to demonstrate here on such a small scale. But you could easily, you know, have chains that are connecting your floating islands, and you know, maybe you have one big floating island in your game world. Maybe you have several floating islands all interconnected, or just kind of spread throughout your world.
Another common thing I've seen on a lot of floating islands is waterfalls kind of cascading off or cascading out of some of the crags in the rocks. So that's just something else that's kind of cool that you can consider. But anyway, I think that's going to about do it for this one. This again was a request, and I thought I would do it, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I always love getting maps from you guys and seeing your drawings too, so share those with me on Facebook or on Twitter. Links are in the description below for those. It's always really inspirational for me, and part of the reason that I was getting the itch to get back into mapping was I kept getting so many cool maps from viewers, and I love it. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. If you're interested in learning how you can support WASD20, you can go check me out on patreon.com/WASD20. And yeah, make sure you're subscribed for more content, and everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.